Welcome to another edition of Eye on the Issues. And joining us today is Mark Ronchetti, the former gubernatorial candidate for the Republican Party in the state of New Mexico. Mark, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. The issue today we're going to talk about, as you know, is marijuana that's been legal in the state of New Mexico recreationally, at least, I guess, a little over a year.
That's right. That's right, Mike. And with very few restrictions. This was something that was entered into with the benefit of what happened in Colorado, Mike. There's been a lot of lessons that could have been learned there. And unfortunately, there was a rush to legalize here in New Mexico. We have a tremendous amount of pot shops all across the state. There's even part of the law that says that individual municipalities can't stop a lot of these shops from opening here. Let's say that you as a small town and it didn't fit your values, you didn't want that there. In most cases, that's not allowed either. People can open as well. So there's been some real troubling developments, I think, with this, even though we've only been into it for about a year.
And what's the sense you get from a community standpoint? Let's say you go to a minor league baseball game, or you're out at a restaurant, or you're elsewhere. Do you start to get the smell of marijuana? Are people out there really using it on a regular basis? What kind of sense do you get?
Yeah, Mike, it's an interesting point. It depends on where you are. For example, you know what was interesting is when we were going through the campaign, you would go to certain towns. You do parades all the time. We must have done 15 parades, Mike. And if you go to certain towns, Albuquerque was one of them, you could just walk through the parade route and it was a constant part of the parade route. So that's anecdotal in that perspective. But what is not anecdotal is some of the pressure that's been put on law enforcement across the state of New Mexico, because what was promised from the legalization of marijuana was that they would get rid of the black market, everything would flow into the normal governmental approved channels in the state. That has not happened in any way, shape, or form. The cartels have set up in Albuquerque in a way that has been continually expanding, and part of it is because of what's happened with marijuana, and then part of it is obviously the fentanyl situation as well. And so we're a state that is a sanctuary state as well, Mike. So as you start to wrap all of this stuff together, it really leaves us in a problematic spot. And this really doesn't even get to the societal costs that I think we're just not seeing yet because we haven't had enough time.
Right. And now the legalization there in the state of New Mexico really came from a law that was passed, signed by the governor. It was not
Right.
a statewide mandate
No.
that passed through. And
Right.
from what I understand, the first year of full marijuana sales, $300 million
Right.
in revenue. Do you hear about
Right.
that?
And you are seeing, but Mike, here's the problem with that is that we are seeing month over month increases to records that continue to increase. So if your goal is to get as many people high as possible, that goal is being met. But if your goal is to make sure that you don't have societal costs that expand far beyond your ability to handle them, then we've got a problem here. And let me explain why. New Mexico has the oldest doctor population in the country. We have a doctor shortage that is one of the worst in the country. And there is a demonstrated effect from marijuana use to leading to more issues that put more pressure on your medical system. We are the worst state in the union for that, and that is going to flow downhill. We are headed to real trouble here, Mike. And part of the problem we have too is that we make it really difficult to be a doctor. We have some of the highest rates for doctors to pay for insurance as well. So all of this kind of wraps into a real concern here. And so really, Mike, the problem here is we don't have a state budget problem, to be honest with you. We're the second oil and gas state in the country for production behind Texas, right? And so we have a tremendous oil and gas boom as far as the budget goes here. But what we're going to see is we're likely to, yes, see high numbers as far as the amount of money brought in for marijuana sales, but we're also going to see a tremendous cost that comes with that as well. If you go back and ask Colorado, has this provided vast amounts of riches to the state government? The answer is no. Now, not even that, even if it did, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do either, by the way, because I think you're feeding your people to the wolves with what we have with the power of some of this marijuana now that we're seeing people use.
You're exactly right. And I was watching a medical report about marijuana, and I think one thing that really needs to be pointed out here: the marijuana that was available 30 years ago is a far cry from what's out there right now. The potency, and that's the huge issue here. The potency of marijuana dramatically affects people differently than it did in the 60s or 70s, wouldn't you say?
Oh, there's no doubt. Just look at the numbers, especially with users under the age of 18. The issues as far as psychosis goes and things of that nature, they're through the roof. And this is something, again, that's going to take time. And Mike, this also is anecdotal, but it really isn't in many ways. If you go back and if you like to, all across the West, we have these little shops that sell things, like from back in the 50s, 60s, 40s. You go thrifting or whatever you want to do and go check it out, right? Well, if you go to a lot of these stores, you'll see signs. And they talk about the healthy cigarette, right? The fitness. I mean, they talk about ridiculous things with cigarettes where we now realize how crazy that is. And the same things happen with marijuana. This thought that marijuana is this green, panacea for health is crazy. It's not true. Now, there are some, I think, medical situations where you can make that case if you want to. But boy, I'll tell you what, for normal use and trumpeting additional use of marijuana like they're doing in the state of New Mexico, and like this governor did with the legislature and rushing into this, is going to prove to be a huge problem.
I would imagine not a lot of research was done into the direct impact of marijuana in Colorado, states like Colorado, where it's been legal for about 10 years now. One of the medical reports that I just recently looked at talked about increased anxiety, schizophrenia, depression, and bipolar disorder. Those are all direct impacts of marijuana use.
Well, Mike, the schizophrenia is the one that's so scary because that tends to affect younger users as well. And so that's a massive concern. And then, Mike, it's not like these numbers are not available to everybody. I mean, as the increase in marijuana usage took over Colorado starting in 2013, what they saw there was traffic deaths increased 24%. And remember, New Mexico has a much higher drunk driving rate than Colorado does. So that's a massive concern as well. And emergency room visits grew by 30% as well, while hospitalizations increased by 200% in Colorado. So you mentioned the numbers and knowing the numbers or knowing what the deal is with the numbers. These are not unknowable, Mike. Just go into the internet and type in quickly, effects of marijuana legalization, and you can see it. So that's a huge concern as well.
Let's talk for a second about states like Wyoming, for example, where marijuana is not legal, nowhere near legal at this point. Obviously, Colorado is a problem. New Mexico has just been legalized for a little bit over a year. As somebody that's run for office in a state like New Mexico, what words of wisdom can you share with Wyoming, people that live in Wyoming?
I think if Wyoming is a great state, and we have spent a lot of time in Wyoming with my family, and it's a special place. And I think running headlong towards something that other states that are not governed well do, while you are governed well, is a mistake. Wyoming does a good job. They're governed well. I have familiarity with their governor. They do a good job. You guys have a great way of life. And running in headlong to marijuana, because the way it's going to be sold is, hey, it's a big moneymaker. It is not. There are prices to be paid for it. And one thing, let me just give you one quick example of this. In New Mexico, you can grow your own, okay? Because you can grow your own, we've seen an increase in grow houses as well. They saw that in Colorado too. And when you can do that, police officers do not have the cause to be able to go in and search a house if you're allowed to grow your own. So that opens things up for the cartels and makes things more difficult. So again, what you see is a way of life in Colorado that was one way. That changed in 2013. I fear it's changing in New Mexico, and it doesn't have to change in Wyoming.
So in respect to the cartels coming into New Mexico, for example, prior to the legalization, were they not there, or are they just there?
No, Mike, I think it's a combination, in all fairness, because I think what you have here is you have a governor of the state of New Mexico who slid in and pulled the National Guard off the border when she was elected in 2018. And then we've started to see more and more of the fentanyl flow up through New Mexico. So that's part of what's happening here. But also, again, the constant promise that the black market would go away has never happened in any state. It has not happened. So if they try to run that up the flagpole in Wyoming, the response needs to be, show me a state where the black market's gone because of legalized marijuana, and the answer will be crickets.
Yeah, and I did talk to a emergency room physician in Colorado Springs recently, and he talked about the number of visits, the number of people coming in there. They're I guess it's called scromiting. They're screaming and they're vomiting at the same time some of them just can't stop for hours on end. It's really scary, and the number of dollars that come in from tax revenue, as you mentioned before, it's in many cases quadrupled in respect to what the people have to pay to take care of those.
Yeah, and Mike, they're called latent costs, right? The reason they call it latent costs is because they're hidden, and latent means hidden. And so the cost of a lot of this is hidden. And I think that the price to be paid will be paid by younger generations when you see how this goes. Now, again, maybe I'm just the old guy who looks at things now and says, "Oh, I don't want any of that." But you mentioned it and you said it very well. When you have the potency that we're talking about now, this is something that deeply affects how brains are wired. There's no doubt about that. And so to me, I just don't see this. I don't see the upside in it. And I think what you notice is in a lot of these cases, a lot of these far left states, New Mexico, I wouldn't necessarily always call us far left. I think we're definitely not as far left as, say, California, Oregon, and Washington, right? Or even Colorado. But we do have a far left governor and a very far left legislature who continually pass things that do not reflect the values of the people of the state. And I would hate to see that happen to Wyoming. And I don't see that in Wyoming leadership. There's no doubt. I don't see it in the representatives that Wyoming sends to Washington. But I do worry too, long term, what's going to happen federally. And that could affect what happens in Wyoming, as well.
Yeah, and we've just heard the Biden administration, they want to lower it to a level 3 drug. So that would be exactly what you're talking about. Let me ask you this. Since it's been legal in the state of New Mexico, have you heard many warnings about pregnant women avoiding marijuana? Do not smoke marijuana, because that is an issue.
No, not one. I haven't heard a single warning, and I have not heard any public information on any of that. And so that's also a concern. Obviously, Mike, alcohol is a concern in the same way, or it's to some degree anyway, but there is no real push for that. And Mike, part of this is because, and you know this as well as anybody, this movement is big business now. I mean, this is big business. They've learned very well how to grease the skids, especially in places where they feel like they can get their foot in the door. And so New Mexico has been one of those places. And so going and seeing a lot of public service announcements and things like that, any warnings, things like that, I haven't noticed a single one.
And your governor just came out recently and signed a measure just a couple months ago to help expunge records of people that have marijuana. They've been arrested for marijuana.
Well, we are the second most violent state in the country, Mike, and our governor also just went out and suspended the Second Amendment in the city of Albuquerque. Okay, so my advice is don't look at what she does as any sort of indication of what should be done. So please, in Wyoming, if you take anything from this, take from it that you should not operate as Michelle Lujan Grisham does here in the state of New Mexico. We are paying the price in a big way.
Gotcha. And I need to ask you, have you skied in Wyoming?
I have. I've skied Targhee. I've skied Jackson Hole. I've skied a couple other smaller spots. I skied Snow King. So yeah. Whenever we get the chance to go to Wyoming, we take it. There's no doubt. And it's not just, cool spots like that. If you go out toward Sheridan and the Bighorns, that's a beautiful place to hike. So we're big fans of the area. And over the next couple of summers, we'll be out there again. And marijuana better not be legal when we go.
Exactly. And speaking of Grand Targhee, by the way, I used to have a ski pass, a winter ski pass at Grand Targhee. The powder there is amazing.
Oh, and it's the best powder in the country. So, and I get Jackson and it's incredible. Jackson Hole's great and everything else, but you go around the other side and the snow is great. The crowds aren't as big. If you hit Targhee on a powder day on like a Thursday, there's nothing better.
I agree with you. So people that are watching this right now that want to learn more about Wyoming and the issues that are happening in Wyoming, whyliberty.org, whyliberty.org. Mark Ronchetti, thank you for your time.
Hey, you guys are doing great work.
Take care.